Our first question this week comes from Quick Draw, who says of the San Jose State loss, it's real simple. Coach Morris and company got their rear ends handed to them from the first play to the last play. Why, you may ask? Because Coach Morris did not demand perfection on game strategy and personnel. There's more to it than that. I think you go all the way back to Club Dub. That was a disaster. Those players hung on to that celebrating thing all the way into the pregame, apparently. Then you got a team that's looking ahead to Texas A&M. We weren't there, but it sure looks like they spent time working on A&M. Then you got the players popping off, all that stuff that was said last Tuesday. It got back to the San Jose State players, and they were clearly ticked off about that and were motivated. Then you got the open date for your opponent. That gives them an extra week to throw up some things you haven't seen before. Now, all of that is how upsets happen, but with this staff, it's a really bad look. They just can't afford those kind of upsets right now. Wu Pig Sui asks, will we see a shuffling of coordinators at the end of the year, or will Arkansas go for a real head coach, or are we going to just roll with another year of inept coaching? You know, shuffling of coordinators is not usually a good answer because who are you going to get? I mean, you bring somebody in, they know that the next year the coach may be fired, so I don't think that's a good idea. Will the staff come back intact next year? I think that depends on Hunter Yurachek and how well this team does from now to the rest of the year. Now, Yurachek said today that he expects the program to show success, and it didn't show success last week. He said he meets with Morris every Sunday, said Morris understands what's expected, that they have to show progress, so we'll see where that goes. Hob Hog wants to know if Starkel comes out with 2 quick picks against A&M, who do you think is the first quarterback off the bench? Well, first of all, I don't think that will happen because I think he's going to play better. I think there were some reasons why he didn't play well, and we get into that maybe later, but he was a little bit overconfident. But if he were to not play well against A&M, or if he got hurt, I still think the guy they go to first is Ben Hicks. But then if Hicks struggles, then you're definitely going to see probably John Stephen Jones and then even KJ Jefferson. So some fans want to see that. It could happen. Hawkeye Blind says, at this point, it appears the defensive GA or quality control intern could put together as effective of a defensive plan as Chavis. Time for a gold watch and retirement for the Chief. You know, if things don't get better with the defense, I could see him retiring. And if that happens, I think what's more likely is that you would, if Morris comes back, you would see one of the position coaches promoted to defensive coordinator. It's hard, again, to get a name replacement at this point with the way the program's going. Unknown Nobody observes, as a program, we are at the lowest point in our history. How did we get here, and what can be done to get us out? I got to make this point by point, so we'll start with number 1. You have to have the right AD in place to hire coaches, and as important or maybe more important, they got to supervise those coaches. Petrino and Bielema are good examples, both good hires in my opinion. They weren't managed properly. Now, even in spite of that, that's not why Jeff Long was fired. He was fired because some powerful boosters convinced the Board of Trustees, hey, we can get Gus Malzahn. But Gus Malzahn's agent said, you got to get rid of Jeff Long for Gus to even consider coming there. So you fire Long, and then you got a mess on your hands. Now, here's what they should have done at that point. You let Hunter Yurachek, your new AD, hire the next head coach. Talking to a booster today, and he said, in retrospect, what should have happened there was they should have made Dan Enos the interim head coach after Bielema was fired after the last game. You either leave him in place until Yurachek comes in and quickly finds a replacement, or if he needs more time, you let Dan Enos be the interim head coach, sort of like John L. did that 1 year only. I think he would have been a much better interim head coach. And you go through a whole season, you evaluate him and the staff, and then at the end of the year, if you need to make a change, your AD is ready to do it. The point is, you've got your athletic director hiring the next head coach, not Julia Peoples with help from the Board of Trustees and boosters. Now, how do you get out of this situation? Well, 2 ways. Number 1, Morris bounces back. It could happen. If he gets this program going again, then you don't have to do anything. You've got your guy in place. But if it doesn't happen, Hunter Yurachek has got to hire a quality replacement. Now, again, I was talking to a booster today that's pretty close to Hunter Yurachek in this situation. He said, I think if it comes to that, he can make a good hire. They like the way, a lot of those boosters like the way he stepped in and solved the problem with basketball, got Musselman in here. They like what's happened there. They like the process he went by to hire the guy. And so they trust him if he has to make a hire as a head football coach. The man played football, his sons played football, they think he knows football, and he would end up with a quality replacement, even though this program is at a low point and it would be hard to attract a quality replacement. Now, Justifiable Hogicide wants to know, if Morris is brought back for year three, do you expect another major drop-off in ticket sales, contributions, and attendance? You know, that depends on the circumstances. If the program improves, shows progress, I don't think there'll be a drop-off. But if Hunter Yurachek, for whatever reason, feels like he has to give Chad Morris a third year no matter what, yeah, I think you could have some problems with attendance, with money. So Hunter Yurachek, at that point, he's got a decision to make. Lanny asked, which is worse, offense or defense? Well, last year it was the offense, no question. But isn't it interesting the way that situation is flipped? You know, I'm not giving up on Starkle because of one game, and I still think this team can improve significantly offensively. It's the defense that's the problem. They're getting no pressure on opposing quarterbacks. Opposing quarterback has forever to throw the ball. That puts too much pressure on the secondary. And then here's the big problem number two, poor tackling, overrunning the football. I don't have time to go into why that happens, but I will just say that junior high football coaches or even pee-wee football coaches teach proper tackling to avoid overrunning the ball carrier, and it happens all the time with this team so far this season. I don't know what's going on with that. Pig in Paradise wants to know, Mike, do you think Chad Morris deserves another year? You know, the standard is usually 3 years. That's fair, and it's reasonable. I think most coaches do deserve a third year. With your third year, you have players who have 2 years in your system that you recruited, and most of the players on your roster were recruited by you. But there are exceptions to this kind of unwritten rule. It doesn't happen often, but this current situation is unusual. I think you got to have more than 4 wins in 2 years, and you may end up having to need at least one conference win and more than 4 wins in 2 years. Again, that's up to the new AD, but that's what's hanging in the craw or sticking in the craw of a lot of Arkansas fans. They want an SEC win, and they want to see more than 4 wins in 2 years. 5, even 6 would be better, but I think 5 might be acceptable to a lot of people because then you show some progress. Kevin asked, did you notice that Morris has a big laminated play sheet, not the note card he's been using? I think it means that he's taken over the offense. What say you? Well, we've got sideline shots that show him looking at that sheet you talked about and then signaling in a play. The problem is we're not sure how often he does it, so we don't know what the mix is there. But whoever's calling the plays and whatever the mix is, they did a bad job last week. They just didn't adjust. Piglet wants to know, what about this team gives you the most hope that it can eventually be good, and what worries you the most? Again, the offense. In spite of last week, I think it's improved so far. You got good talent at quarterback. You got talent at wide receiver. You got talent at quarterback, running back, wide receiver. The O-line, that's still a question. But they've even played better at times. The most concern, again, the defense. It appears to have gone backwards. Dwight K. Schrute asked, what would be your go-to request for a song if you were allowed in Club Dub? No one should be allowed in Club Dub. Bolt the doors. Bolt them shut. Put up a sign, out of business. End of story. Sieb says, we have fired coaches in the past for being mediocre. Now we are all thirsting for mediocre and are not tasting a drop. What defects do you see in the staff, and is it obvious to you? Well, there's some things that are obvious. I've talked about it. The play calling, one of the biggest. It's too hit and miss, too slow to adjust. But this player-led culture it doesn't appear to be working. I don't know what their definition of culture is for player-led, but to me it's upperclassmen leadership. You know, where was that leadership last week when the players were clearly taking San Jose State too lightly? You know, I think they got to re-emphasize leadership. Get back with these guys, especially the upperclassmen, and say, when you see this stuff going on during the week, you got to nip it in the bud. Don't have a bunch of guys going into talk to the media after Tuesday's practice talking about blowouts. Okay, I don't understand not playing younger players on defense. That's an issue with the defensive staff. Again, we've talked about it. John Chavis has said over and over again that he wants to be able to rotate his defensive ends, his defensive linemen, and he's not doing it. And then you see what happens. Somebody gets hurt. You stick somebody in there, they're not ready. It's hard. It's hard to put a guy on the field when he's that young. But that's the only way they get better. Okay. Blood Red Hog observes, Morris did not go back to Hicks after the third Starkle interception of the fourth or the fifth. Does this mean Morris does not want to repeat the mistake of last year's quarterback roulette? You know, I think that was part of it. You definitely don't want to go back to that. And I think Morris understands that would be a red flag with the fans. But I also think what it shows us is that staff, even with 5 interceptions, they believe that Nick Starkle is their best option. If they didn't, they would have made a change. And look what he did in the fourth quarter. He came back. He brought the team back from 2 touchdowns down, tied that game up. It's not his fault that the defense just turned around and collapsed with a little over 2 minutes to go in the game. Okay, Hoggle wants to know, Mike, do you think it's still possible to get Mike Leach to Arkansas or get Bobby Petrino back? That's a big no to Petrino. You can't go backwards. It didn't work out at Louisville. He went back there. He's not there anymore. Don't want to do that. As far as Leach, we got this confirmed again yesterday, I think. Leach wanted the Arkansas job, and he called and asked about it. But they never called him back. In fact, he says the only time he ever talked to anybody from Arkansas was back when he was offensive coordinator at Kentucky, and that job was open after, when the Houston Nutt took the job. He was interviewed by Frank Broyles, but he didn't get the job, and that's the only time Arkansas's ever really talked to Mike Leach. The word from him right now is he's got a new contract at Washington State. He'll make $4 million a year next year. That's $500,000 more than Chad Morris. So if you were to get him, you would have to pay him more. You're going to have to pay, I think he has a $2 million buyout, so you'd have to do that. Then you're having to buy out Chad Morris. And so it gets very expensive. But the word we get from somebody that knows Mike Leach is that if he left there, the job he now has his eye on is the Florida State job. Midway 642 asks, Mike, what do you think the effect of the San Jose State game will be on recruits? Keep your fingers crossed. They've only lost 1 so far. Now, they need to bounce back this week just to limit the damage from that. But this is the point I would make. Recruiting could play into a decision that Hunter Yurachek has to make at the end of the season, depending on how recruiting goes and how, the recruits react to what Arkansas does. If you see some more decommitments, then I think it's more problematic for Chad Morris. Well, that's it for this week. We'll see you next Monday, where maybe we'll be discussing a shocking development, the end of that Aggie winning streak over the Hogs.